and welcome back to Skip the Small Talk. This week we've got a book club episode, so it's my first guest, which I'm very excited about and slightly nervous about. We're going to be joined by the wonderful Jordan Stevens, who is a musician, actor, author, activist, presenter, all the good stuff. And we're going to be talking about his new book, Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs, which I loved. So yeah, I'm very excited, and let's get into it. I'm going to go straight in with a big Q. I think one of the things I love most about the book was it's so raw and honest and like vulnerable. And I think one thing that I've noticed is in my work, I talk a lot about like unmasking and like being yourself and like letting that guard down. But I think with some things, it's almost like a controlled authenticity still. Like there's still a lot of things that I feel shame about and won't talk about, even though I'm talking about being yourself. And I guess my question is like, how did you sort of like overcome that shame barrier and just like be so like be so open and honest in your writing?
Shame barrier with like my general life experiences or specifically ADHD?
Yeah, just like specifically like just I feel like the book was just so honest about so many like things that are like a lot of things that have stigma, like the sort of like addiction side of things and the heartbreak side of things, just like very vulnerable and letting go of that shame.
I think, well, I've said it before, but it is true in that I don't think I would have ventured into my past self if I didn't feel like I was a new version of myself in a stable relationship. And one of the big upsides about opening my heart up and engaging in another intimate love, probably the most intimate love, definitely the most intimate love and mature love I've experienced, is that I feel less alone. I feel like I have somebody I can fall back on, which is something I didn't feel a lot before. And so I was more empowered to be open because it's nothing I hadn't shared with her already. And, you know, what's the worst case scenario? That some people think a way about me. They're probably not important to me, you know? Yeah. And also I made a promise to myself at the start of the process that I wasn't going to focus too much on my own persona, like Jordan Stevens, what that means. I'm just not so hell-bent on curating an idea of myself because, like, I want the book and everything I write to live beyond me. And then, you know, when I'm dead, I won't be wondering or caring whether or not some fucker from a party I went to cares, you know, or thinks that this isn't very cool. And also things like drug addiction, common problem, infidelity, common problem, very usual. And I think when we have these things in hiding, they become worse. They don't become better.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think like one of the things that I hear with that is like how important, and I've like really felt it in the last chapter of the book when you talk about your relationship now and like how much that has been important for your like growth and like just for you as a human being. I think we live in a society now where it's like very individualistic and it's like you know, if you can't love yourself, then how can you expect anyone else to love you? And you have to like work on yourself first. How do you think we like strike that balance of like, you do have to like you obviously went away and did a lot of work on yourself, but like also you need to heal like in connection with other people as well. Like how do you think we get that balance of like, not that you have to fully heal in isolation and do all the work yourself, but also not to like go to somebody else when you're still going to hurt them or whatever?
Yeah, it's tough. I would argue, that, you know, within our society, Western society, there does seem to be this real focus on hyper-individualism, especially with men. I've seen a lot of, like literally in the last 2 days, I've been blown away by how many accounts there seem to be online, specifically Twitter, that have all this life advice for men. And so many of the most retweeted comments are say that no one cares about you, you're alone, you can only trust yourself. That's the rhetoric that seems to radicalize men. Because, you know, all you need is a couple of people confirming that fear. And often we create that fear.
Yeah.
You know, we create what we're most scared of if we're unconscious about it. I'm yet to see a metric that would support the idea that living a life of solitude and disconnection is beneficial for anybody, other than the community, a small community of powerful people who are, I guess, ironically connected in a sense, profiting off the confusion and inadequacy of the masses. I always say that one of my favorite phrases is freedom is the absence of want. If we are able to feel good about ourselves and in doing so connect to those around us, then we're unstoppable. But it's in a small group of people's interests for people to be isolated. And I also think a lot about, I get asked a lot, how do I define masculinity and femininity? And I have my idea of how I define those terms. And I personally believe in those terms. I know some people don't. I don't gender those terms, but I believe they're rooted in what the difference is between men and women, biological mainly. But what I can say is I look at it as a heart opening and closing. To remove gender, that's how I look at it. Every single human being has a responsibility to create a relationship with their heart where they can open and close it at appropriate times.
Yeah.
But what I see in society are people, and this is what happens with, too much self-help or not any self-help, is that there are people walking around who have been hurt so badly as children that their hearts are closed indefinitely. Or it happens when they're older, they just close their hearts and they disconnect and they pull out, they pull away, and no one can get to them, and then they start acting in behaviors that push everyone away. But to the other extent, you have people whose hearts are too open, and I really believe that. I know for some reason I caught myself saying that like it's maybe controversial, but there are people who care too much at the expense of themselves.
Yeah.
So they're just running around trying to fill everyone else's cup. There's that whole thing. How can you fill up a cup? It's kind of like what RuPaul's saying, to be honest. Like, if you can't love yourself, it's the same essence. You do have to reserve a certain amount of energy so you're in a good position to be able to connect. People who go around and put themselves last aren't able to properly connect, I don't believe either.
Yeah.
And it's all about control. People who are too nice are trying to control the feelings of other people around them. They want to, and I've been there.
I heard you said that on, I think it was another podcast where you were saying like that kindness in some, or like being nice sometimes is manipulative, and it's like you're trying to force everyone to like you. It's like, no, that's not actually nice if all you're doing is, your niceness is trying to make everyone think, oh, this is a great person, like she's so great, I want to be around her all the time.
Right. And that's coming from a people pleaser. That's something I have to unlearn all the time. But my point is that that's our responsibility. We have to learn when to open and close our hearts. And the more work I've done on myself, I believe I have a better grasp or better relationship between me and knowing that function. And I have to have my heart open in order to have these beautiful friendships and my relationship, and to suddenly feel as though I'm part of other people, and vice versa.
Yeah.
To the same extent, there's some people I don't want in my life anymore. And there's some things I have to accept that are horrible, and I can protect myself. So, I don't believe anybody can live a life of harmony without a balance between solitude and community. It's all about balance.
Yeah. Do you think that's affected by like figuring out, I know you were diagnosed first earlier on, but I guess like really like owning your ADHD like later in life? I think for me, since getting my diagnosis, so before figuring, I'm autistic and ADHD, and I think before figuring that out, I would almost be in the too nice category. Like I think I took everything at face value all of the time and was like, I would always assume good intentions of people, and that ended up in me getting burned a lot. And then now I understand like why that might be, because I don't read social cues in the same way, or because I'm impulsive or whatever it might be. It's almost like easy to go in the other direction, I think, of like, oh, well, I used to be open and I got burned, so now like let's not be open all the time. And I think striking that balance, do you think, like, have you found that with your own like late sort of understanding of your ADHD?
I mean, wow. I firstly, just as a comment, like I really believe that the bravest thing anybody can do, any single human can do, is feel betrayed, rejected, abandoned, and then open their hearts again.
Yeah.
That's the single.
It's so scary.
That's the single bravest thing a human being can do. I literally can't think of anything more brave than that, and that's why it's so hard. You know what I mean? That's why it's so hard. And I think I've always been impulsive. I've always been very open. But for me, just to go back to what I said before, I guess I had to be clear on my own measure of love. What is it that I want from love? and need, actually, by my own like what I believe to be fair standards, and then I can kind of apply that into various situations and then have a clear boundary. That's, I think, the only way I could differentiate between falling into people pleasing or codependency, which I had a real issue with. And not even just in love, drugs, you know, it's all a codependency, you know, this thing will make me better, you know, and it's like, no, this is what I'd like from that. And this is the point at which it's gone too far.
Yeah.
So it's just finding that. And for me, it was tapping into my anger, which I was terrified about accessing. And now healthy anger, that is a boundary. And we have, it must be even, I mean, I don't know. There's so many variables in a person's life that can shift that.
Yeah.
You know, it will make that more, you know, you might have had, I don't know. Did you have any experiences with anger early on that put you off the idea of being angry with people, or?
I think definitely on the autistic side, it's that every emotion is so big. And I think when you're younger and people don't know where those big feelings come, it's like you're being dramatic, you're being like an attention seeker or whatever it is, and then you learn, okay, I won't have big feelings anymore, and then you switch off from that a bit, I think.
Is that the kind of RSD thing?
Yeah, I think that definitely shows up as well. I think like RSD is, I think it's nuts how little that is like included in, like, when you get an ADHD diagnosis, no one talks about that, and there's no like physical written in the like black and white diagnostic criteria. There's nothing about like the emotional differences, and I think that's like wild, because to me, like when I talk to people, and like for me personally, the RSD is probably like the biggest way that it impacts me. Like obviously I think it's different because like there's like the more like almost like practical side of ADHD, like, yeah, I can't focus, yeah, I can't sit still, like, yeah, I can't do things, I can't finish the tidying up or whatever. I think that's like easier to separate from yourself almost. And then for me, but like the RSD side is like so intrinsic to how you feel. Like I think and I think for me, I'm realizing it shows up in so many more ways than I thought. Like I think when we talk about it, it is like that like fear of abandonment and that pain of being rejected and criticized and whatever. But then I think it also becomes like the avoidance of those things as well, of like, so for example, I know that if I go to someone with something and they don't handle it in the exact way that I need them to handle it, that's going to like set alarm bells off with my RSD. But then I think it's like, well, then it sort of becomes the like, you go the other way of being like so hyper independent, because you're like, well, I've got this thing that I feel sensitive about, and I don't want to take it to someone because I know that if I do take it to them and they don't handle it perfectly, then that's going to set me off. So I think like, and that's not something that's ever talked about, like when you get an ADHD diagnosis.
Do you not think that you can just instruct the person on how to deal with it?
I found this really interesting when you said, I think you said it on ADHD Chatter, about like you just like let people know in advance of like, if I come to you, how to talk to me. I think that's really like something that I haven't thought about in terms of like accommodations and stuff before, because it's like you think of like the practical accommodations of like, I don't know, I need like deadlines when I'm doing work, or I need this, but like the relational like accommodations, I think is like, something that we should be talking about a lot more, of like just letting people know how to communicate with you.
Just as practical advice, because, you know, like I say, I wouldn't want people to feel isolated as a result of how they feel, or RSD or whatever. And for me, I've learnt that through experience, and I refuse to feel ashamed of asking for that, because like I say, we have to teach people how to love us. We have to teach people how to engage with us. And, you know, there'll be some more acceptable ways of doing that. You know what I mean? There'll be more recognized ways of doing that if it was maybe like a physical ailment, or you know, I guess also, or if there was some visible, I don't know, or, you know, if someone was going through grief or just lost somebody, you know, people would naturally start to adjust how they approach the situation. I have one memory of actually with an ex who was a great partner. I was actually a mess. We just kind of weren't right for each other. And it was years ago. But I remember I was making this music, and I remember I played her a song that I'd made, and she was getting ready to go out. She was literally like half paying attention. And I remember going, like, what do you think? And she was like, yeah, it's good. I remember like, I remember this so vividly. This was me when I had the least amount of awareness. The "yeah, it's good" was so passive.
Yeah.
That I literally never listened to the song again. I've just remembered this when we're talking about RSD. I didn't listen to the song for months, like maybe 7 months, right? And then like 7 months later, I'm sat in the living room with my mum and my best friend, and I was playing them through all these demos. And I was playing them these songs, and like, oh, this is wicked, da da da. And then they were like, oh, have you got any more? And I was like, well, there is this one other song, and I remember seeing it. It said like times played, and it was once. And I said, yeah, there's this one song, but I played it ages ago, but I don't think it's very good. And they went, why don't you play it? So I played it, and they were like, the fuck?
Yeah.
And that ended up being like the biggest song from that record.
Yeah.
And it wasn't not her fault.
And as well, it wasn't even that she was like that.
She wasn't even saying it was bad. She didn't even say it was bad.
It
She was just distracted.
Positive, yeah.
She was just distracted, but I needed this like enthusiasm. So, you know, it's like, yeah. So I just make clear that I just said, if you want to help me, and you know, I've obviously said this on the podcast already, but I'll say it again for your audience, but I make it very clear from the jump. Anybody working with me creatively, that goes from the editor on my book, which is obviously kind of ironic because it's ADHD. But he actually encouraged the pushing of ADHD in the end. But my editor of my book, my girlfriend, my mum. My mum's, you know, very critical, but means well. She's very enthusiastic when she's excited about something. Anybody, I'm like, look, even if you don't rate it, but you want to help me, lead with the positivity, yeah, and then I'll listen.
Yeah. The editor of the book one is what, like when I was editing my book, they can literally say the most objective comment in the whole world. Like they're like, oh, can you just explain what you mean here? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, because that's you telling me that I've not done a good enough job of explaining it in the first place.
Yeah, it's a real technique.
It winds me up so, and I'm like, why is this stressing me out so much? All they're trying to do is get the best out of it. Like they're not going scrap the whole thing, burn it. They're going, this would be slightly better for people to read if you explained this, but your brain just hears shit.
Also, I find that people at a certain level, in terms of like, you know, high levels of creative output, or even people who are connecting to you based off of appreciation for your creativity, I think they assume that I think that everything I create is amazing. So the standard in their mind is that like, oh, this is great. So their contribution is this is how to make it better.
Yeah.
But they have unfortunately assume that I think that is great by default, which I really don't.
Yeah.
So I don't think there can ever be enough praise.
I think as well, something that like similar to that, something that really stuck with me that one of my like creator friends said to me was like, she's also autistic and ADHD, and she was like, I won't post anything online unless I am 100% confident and happy with it. That's because wild. Otherwise people will, like, if I'm a bit iffy about something and someone comments like something that's like a bit critical with it, then it hurts. Whereas she's like, I have to be sure that I am at a point where it won't bother me if someone comments on it. And I'm like, I just don't think I could ever get to a point where I'd ever be not
Of course
bothered.
you can. Yeah, of course you can. It is. I really have to state the case for neuro plasticity. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Where you can do something enough and it changes. Yeah, I really do believe that. There are certain things that I do now that would have been unimaginable to me years ago.
Yeah.
Building confidence and I think building up a resilience to rejection is possible for sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely happened with me. I've gone both ways. When I was a kid, I dealt with so much embarrassment and humiliation just from being a teenage boy. It happens.
Yeah.
That I felt, you know, unbeatable, and I was delusional. So with all the Rizzle Kick stuff, I was like, yeah, we're gonna make it. And then, you know, people, when I started rapping at school, people used to take the piss out of me. They used to mock me. They used to, you know, I didn't care. And then when I started doing the work in my mid-20s, that first 2 years, I went the whole other way. You know, I was suddenly like super sensitive to everything because I was sober.
Yeah.
I was sober for the first time. I was learning about myself. My therapist said to me, like, do you want to open this box? Because once you start, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And she untangled the difference in me between anxiety and ADHD. I'd thrown everything into the ADHD box when actually a large part of it was a massive amount of anxiety, me running away from feeling sad, me running away from feeling angry. And so it's really hard, you know, that whole bit. And I had to go through feeling really rejected again and really sad again. And now I feel like I'm coming out the other side, but this time I'm more experienced and I'm sober. And, you know, and by the way, sobriety, I mean, actually, I do really believe, especially people with ADHD shouldn't drink, but that's just my personal opinion.
I've just done 100 days sober. I'm just started.
Have you?
Yeah, Lewis, my brother, is also autistic and ADHD. He's done like 2 years, and I was like, I'll give it a go. I'm on a just over 100 days.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
well done.
I think it is
Game changer.
Yeah, I think one thing for me as well is so being autistic, I know that I can be like awkward in social situations. So I think I would always like fall back on, oh, I need to have a drink, because then I'm not in like, I've not got that voice in my head all the time being like, you're being annoying, you're being awkward, you're being this, you're being that. That like it quietens it down. So I would always be like, oh, I just need to have a pint, and then I'll like get along better with everyone in the room. But it's like actually learning that you can still go into that room, not have the pint, and get on with people. I think that's a massive confidence booster for me to be like, oh, I actually can have a conversation sober.
Yeah,
which sounds like a
definitely.
silly thing to say, but I think you do get into that habit of being like, oh, I'm more fun when I've not had a drink, because I'm like not as up there with all the hundreds of conversations having all the
And
same
also
time.
we should be training ourselves really, or could be training ourselves, because I know that feeling for sure. But it's just one thing I've noticed that's differed with me in the last I've been sober 6 years, is that I feel all of that still. Before it'd be paralyzing,
Yeah.
and that's actually in my early 20s was why I did cocaine, which I've spoken about before, because it just quietened those voices, which is I guess what some medication does. But I've noticed that I still feel that, but it just goes quicker.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah, it's like an
I'm
in and
just
out
guessing,
rather than that it's like clinging there in your brain. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had a couple moments recently where I've hyper focused on actually leaving parties too early for some reason. But I've just had a new voice pop up, which will be a really healthy voice, which will say, you'll be fine in a day.
Yeah.
Which is great. So
Yeah.
I'm saying that I just want to remind you and those listening that there definitely is, with enough practice and enough resilience, other voices do pop up, or I think a greater connection to the authentic self.
Yeah.
And then just like reviewing certain things, like, you know, my girlfriend helps me a lot with this. You know, sometimes we'll be sitting and I'll be thinking about, oh, you know, what if I said this to that person, and and then I'm just like, I don't even like that person.
Yeah, the people pleasing runs so deep. Like, I want these people to like me, even though I
fucking
don't like them. Yeah.
Like, why do I care?
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
It is. I think it's that, like, I find that so much of like, and I think that shows up when you're not aware of it so much in like dating at the start, when you're like, oh, have I made a good impression on this person? I don't even like them. I didn't have a good time, but I'm just worrying about if I made the best first impression.
I know. Yeah, not good.
But yeah, I think is actually really interesting, like sort of what you've mentioned about like the neuroplasticity and stuff. I think we don't talk enough about the trauma that comes with being like neurodivergent, ADHD, autistic, whatever it is. And that those are two separate things. Like, yes, these are like the natural ways that my brain behaves. And then these are the knock-on effects of having that without the right context. So this is like, I felt lazy, I felt stupid, I felt annoying, I felt too much.
Yeah, big time.
And then that makes you act a certain way, but that's not inherently the ADHD. That's the result of the trauma of having the ADHD, if that makes sense. And I don't think we separate them enough, of being like, no, yeah, your brain's always going to work in certain ways. Like, you're always going to find this thing difficult or that thing difficult, or you're going to need support with this thing. But like that bit, the trauma side of it, you can actually get rid of that. Like, that's not going to stick along like the whole time as well.
Yeah, I think, certainly. I guess our responsibility, which is fucking hard and probably a bit unfair, is that we shouldn't, I don't believe, and I try not to actually identify with the neurodivergence. I accept and want to dance with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of like, don't let it be everything, and don't let it be like, I can't change this, or I can't do these things, or I can't, like, no, you're going to have challenges with those things, but there are ways around it.
Yeah, and whenever possible, I just try and, with the knowledge I gain, communicate and just contextualize certain things.
Yeah.
You know, like I actually had it recently with a friend where I suspected that his partner, I want to ask about this too. His partner is ADHD. And of course with women, that's a whole other conversation, which I actually really want you to shed some light on, because obviously the most diagnosed are boys, single parent, low income household, but that's only because the most recognizable traits, I'd argue, especially with the socialization of boys and girls, is this kind of
the naughty schoolboy,
but it was funny because I was saying to, I was like, I think she's ADHD, man. Obviously I'm not a doctor, but he was like, no, you don't get it, and there was this whole discussion about this pile of clothes, and I remember saying to him, like, she can't see them. Yeah,
they literally become part of just the room. Yeah,
and he's like, "What do you mean, man?" And I was like, "And I I don't know how to explain it, but if it's as I suspect, she actually can't see the clothes, which I know for him is really tough to, because he really doesn't have ADHD in that way.
Yeah.
And I went, and it's not. I'm not saying that's okay that it's left there, but that's what we're working with.
Yeah.
And I
that's
can say
where we're
that
starting from.
Yeah. And then, I'm not sure if I've said this on a podcast before, but when I've had that issue myself, we've tried to do stuff in our house, which is tough because it's not just me there, to do with ADHD geography. You know much about this?
I've not heard of it called that before, but like basically working like with, like if you always leave stuff on the floor, then just put a basket on the floor rather than trying to convince yourself that you're going to start putting it in the wardrobe.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that,
Game changer. Little things like that really help. But it's hard. It is hard because, especially with tidiness, there is a socialized morality attached to it, which I personally, this is another thing I've been saying recently at home, where like there's a suitcase, not mine, suitcase by the door, open. I understand that.
Yeah.
I literally, like, when I walk in, I've said it as a point of reference. I went, look, I understand yous are stressed, but just for the record, I didn't open the front door. I wasn't stressed. That makes sense to me. It feels to me like you're in between going places. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's exciting. Maybe you need the suitcase again.
Yeah.
Like
I'm like up and down from London all the time, and my suitcase just stays on my floor. And I've just moved back into my mum and dad's for a bit, and my mum and dad's like, "Can you like empty that?" And I'm like, "But I'm gonna have to repack it in like 3 days, so it's just there." Do
you know what I mean? That's what I mean. I had this in a conversation in Cheltenham on the weekend. I said, someone asked me about this. What advice can you give? And I just kind of went on a rant, and then was like, the funny thing is, if I could design houses, people would be mind blown.
Ooh,
if I could actually, if I sat down and was like, I'm going to do ADHD architecture, people wouldn't know what hit them.
Imagine an apartment block that you could move into, and it was all like designed for ADHD living, and everyone in there was ADHD. What I've said as well is I would pay so much money if I could live somewhere and everything was sorted for you. Like, you didn't have to sort your council tax, you didn't have to sort any bills. Like, they did all the admin side of it as well. So you don't
people not do that.
I don't know, maybe like fully like managed living.
That's ridiculous. They don't do that, innit?
Yeah.
I think you've got to get really, really, really rich.
Yeah, you've got to be like a billionaire, and then they'll do all that. But
wait, but hold on.
Living,
can I see if you agree with me on this? Mm-hmm. In my ADHD flat, I would have a washing machine the minute I could walk in the door. Is that mental?
You can't miss it. No, yeah, I think that's, and you could literally like walk in, take your clothes off,
and put it in the machine.
Yeah.
You with me on that?
We'll make it happen. The new
would you do that?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I knew
ADHD
it.
apartment.
I knew you would put the washing machine by the door. Okay. In terms of like, are there any specific challenges to being a young woman with ADHD?
I think for me, it's
stigmas.
Yeah, I think mostly it's the fact that it went misdiagnosed for so long. So growing up, I sort of got worse in high school. Like 15, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, anxiety-related depression, and then 17, panic disorder and agoraphobia. So it was always put down to like, and I see how this has happened, because I think for me, a big thing, so like with my ADHD, I always say like, I just wish my brain would shut up. Like my brain is just always like,
running.
Worrying. And that's something that I would say to my mum from being tiny. I'd be like, I just wish my brain would shut up. And then I've said that to my mum, and then like I've said that to like doctors or teachers or whatever, and they've translated that into it being anxiety, because it's like, oh well, there's thoughts running around my head, and they think that that's worries going around my head, but I'm like, no, it's just thoughts. It's not like that I'm worrying about stuff. It's just that there's just so much going on up there. So I think for me, that was the main struggle of like, the fact that I spent so long thinking that it was like my mental health and anxiety and depression, when it's like, actually, it's not been that the whole time. It's just become that because I didn't have the right tools or the right information or whatever.
Okay. Do you think that, I mean, for me, school is I'd be anxious at school. It's quite a logical place to be unbelievably anxious.
Yeah. I think the social side for me was definitely really tricky. I think that's more like the autism side than the ADHD side. But yeah, growing up was rough.
Yeah, so there's it crosses over, doesn't it? There's some, it seems to be more common nowadays especially with women.
They think
ADHD, autism.
about between 40 and 70% of people have both.
So what do you think is the autism? Is socially?
The social side of things, like the communication side. Sometimes I think this is the one that's actually like difficult to separate. Sometimes I find it so hard to say in words what I want to say, and I like this, like if I'm doing something like with work, I find it so hard to like ask somebody else to help me or to delegate something, because I can't turn the thoughts into a sentence or into like a clear instruction. I think that's like the communication side for me is like big with autism. The social side of like I don't know, just like missing the, like, I can't tell someone's like intentions, or I can't read between the lines of like, I basically have a choice when I meet people. I have to assume everybody is all good all the time, or I have to be fully closed off, because I can't tell like if someone
You can't do they can't get the nuance going, open, close.
no, I can't do like, and because it's like I can't pick up the, like, say if I was like, I don't know, in the early stages of dating somebody, and somebody else might pick up on red flags of being like, I don't know, if someone
No, I
was
hear
like
that.
cancelling or something, and I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh no, but they're just busy. And
Yeah.
they'd be like, no, Ellie, if they've cancelled on you like 3 times, they're not just busy.
You're
That's
being a dick.
yeah. But I wouldn't pick up that up, because I'm like, well, they've told me that they're busy, so they must be busy.
So you just believe them,
take things quite literally, I think.
which is okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I think
But that you
now I'm
consider that-
aware of it, it's a lot better. I think when I didn't know that I was prone to taking things literally, that's like a slippery slope to be on, that you just take everything at face value. Whereas now, knowing that, you have that information, so you're like, oh, I can check it, I can ask somebody what they think, or I can like
I think
check
I'm a
in
bit
with a
like
friend.
that. I always think I'm like a chocolate Labrador.
Yeah.
You ever met a chocolate Labrador?
Yeah, very loving,
Just
very
bound up
yeah.
to people and just blah, 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 blah. I do that a lot. I've actually been teaching myself the other mechanism a little bit of like, not sure. And I personally think, like, do you feel that there is progress in the sense of you're starting to pick up, maybe I don't want to hang out with this person?
I think
that
it
you
is
can
like
feel
just
it?
having that, like knowing that you're prone to doing something makes it much easier to not do that thing, doesn't
Really?
it? Whereas I think if you were just like, you didn't know any otherwise, or you didn't know that anybody else was picking up on things that you weren't, or
Or do you
whatever.
feel other people's energy when you're around them?
Yeah, I definitely can. Like, I really pick up on. I was actually watching a TikTok about this recently, and it was talking about different types of empathy, where neurotypical people are more likely to have like cognitive empathy. So it's like, I understand how you're feeling, and I can think about the way that you've told me you're feeling, and I can understand how you're feeling. Whereas like neurodivergent people, sometimes it's more like somatic empathy, like I can feel what you're feeling. Whereas like, so it's like if you're in a room with someone who's like really stressed, you also like feel that stress. Or if you're talking to someone who's like, if you're like, I don't know, someone you care about is like really going through it, you like feel that sadness. Or like, I think the same with happiness as well. Like if someone's like buzzing, you're also like picking up on that like happy vibes. And I think that's something that I definitely do.
That's interesting, that split with typical and divergent.
I guess it's all like blurred and stuff, but I think like, yeah.
It is blurred for sure. I've definitely had a history where I've actually had to, again, focus on containing my energy slightly, because I definitely can bring a room down or up.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And it's been like this burden. Feels like I could be the world's best cheerleader, but then if I'm feeling it,
yeah,
it's
you
tough.
can't like hide behind. Yeah.
I am the worst at hiding how I feel. Like, it's really tough for me.
But then you say that that's the worst, but I feel like that's also like, in my opinion, that would be like the most helpful thing, because like you always know how someone's feeling when there's so much that's like hidden, and like,
Yeah.
you know, like for me who misses cues, to have those cues so obvious would be like ideal, because I'd be like, oh, I know that I'm not going to say something wrong, because like
Yeah,
I know
true.
if he's feeling shit, like I can feel it, rather than like not picking up that someone's like hiding that they're feeling shit, and then you say something and then they snap or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been on the receiving end. I had a situation recently where, for whatever reason, I was in an uncomfortable social situation. I was caught in between, you know, a social political situation, and my God, could I feel it?
Yeah.
Without any words. Wild.
Yeah.
To the point where I was like, I had to ring my girlfriend and be like, yo, this is wild. Like, I know this person is annoyed at me about this thing,
Yeah.
but they're not saying anything to me.
Yeah, but you can just sense.
Oh, the worst.
Yeah. And then you don't know how to navigate it.
Well, I eventually got to the point where I had to just ask them. But
Yeah.
I do realise that I'm gifted with that. I think my mum threw me into so many unconventional scenarios when I was a kid. Always around adults, always around such a diverse group of adults. Also, I'm mixed race, so I was around, you know, Caribbean, my Caribbean family, you know, who were living in Tottenham, and they were all diverse in their own way, you know, different shades of black and brown, and yeah. And then with my mum's side, you know, rich, poor. My mum, I mean, we had no money, but she has, you know, this lineage. At some point, people do have a bit more cash, and it's just this bizarre. So I was suddenly having to learn how to code switch really quickly.
Yeah.
So when it came to like masking and shit like that, I think it was a lot it came so naturally to me.
Yeah, because you'd been used to like switching between
Yeah,
different situations anyway.
you know what I mean? I'd seen people, I guess, maybe I'd seen people mask themselves, or
Yeah.
I've later realized that my mum and dad are unbelievably ADHD and that has 100% traumatized me, which is like in a very usual parents aren't perfect way.
Yeah.
But like look, again, whenever I label these people, I don't mean it in a sense of like, so this means anything. It's just now I've learned more about ADHD.
Yeah,
I'm
you
reviewing.
can see it. Yeah, you
Oh
go
my
back through the
God.
family history and you're like, well, this person, like me and Lewis both got diagnosed. Like Lewis got diagnosed just after me, and we can like go back and like trace each thing, be like, well, it comes from this side, and then it comes from this person, and this person who's always behaved in this way, like who always has to have the cushions in a certain direction on the sofa and can't have it. Like you can see where it all comes from.
Yeah, I mean, look, without a doubt, whenever I go see my dad, there is a cup of tea in the microwave.
That he's
That's
forgotten
cold.
about, and then tried to warm it up, and then forgotten that he was warming it up
cold.
in the microwave.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, he forgot he made
like,
the tea,
yeah.
so it's cold. So he put it in the microwave,
And
put
then
it
he's
on, and then
forgotten it.
forgotten that it was in the microwave.
Perfect.
And then, you know, I've always had a thing of my mum she's so easily distracted. But also my mum is so sensitive, so I'm realizing that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There are so many crossovers in life, and one I think we have a responsibility to try and keep tabs on is defo the anxiety one.
Yeah.
Anxiety and depression. I think I was very fortunate to have this form of therapy, which I've spoken about. I said in a Matt Willis podcast, I've said it loads. It's in the book, AEDP, which is Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy. And the reason why this is so important for me is it was based around knowing how to feel, learning how to feel, which is massive.
Yeah.
And I hear so many stories nowadays of people who are in talk therapy are complaining about it. You know, it doesn't work. Some people aren't prepared to reckon with what they've said, which is true regardless. But this was amazing. I'd go into therapy and sure, I'd talk, but my therapist is looking at how I'm talking,
Yeah.
how I'm sitting, how I feel in response to questions. It's amazing. Changed my life.
Yeah.
And for me, and it like I say, we untangled what I thought was anxiety and ADHD.
Yeah.
You know? And that was massive for me.
Yeah.
And let's look, you know, from you sharing your experience, you got tangled into that straight away.
Yeah.
A school environment, which is probably the most anti-ADHD environment of all time, which is a school, which is, you know, like the national curriculum. and then the pressures of social thing, if there is, you know, if you were developing or struggling to reckon with autism, again, hyper social school.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So all of those elements,
Yeah.
but with no tools on.
Yeah.
You know?
Knowing what's what and like untangling it. Something that I also really loved in the book was when you talk about like football as a means to connection. I've talked about similar things. So big Leeds fan. It's Arsenal versus Leeds that you talk about in the book. And I was like, But big Leeds fan. Like my interests have always been like going to the football and going to gigs. And I look back at that now, and I always think that makes sense as someone who was like struggling socially or like just isn't able to read those rules, because like you know exactly how to behave. Like you go to the football and all you have to do is like chant at the right time, cheer at the right time, boo at the right time, and you're part of the gang.
And also the focus
belonging.
is on someone else.
Yeah, it's not on like how you're behaving. And I like think that, and then also tied, like you talk about like how it's sort of like a means to intimacy, especially for men. I think like massively. It's very interesting as like a tool to connect with other people.
I mean, I think I said something on the podcast recently that it hasn't come out yet, and I might wait for it to come out to see how people take to it. But men's relationship with sports is just generally fascinating, because I believe it runs counter to a lot of the divine disciplines or the authentic masculinity we're trying to, you know, maintain. So the core of football, I think, is beautiful. Like I say, community, engaged, you know, support, being passionate. Passion is great.
Yeah.
And it's a language, like I say, you know, a joint interest, knowing that so many people have seen the thing. And I use an example of literally what I felt was the de-intensifying or I don't know what the word is. I'd made a whole situation less tense in the middle of the fucking Amazon because I asked someone what football team he supports. That's incredible. That's magic. And then we have to deal with the other side of it, which I find fascinating, which is the obsession. Because for me, when you're talking about opening and closing heart,
Yeah.
how fascinating is that lens then for football?
Yeah.
Where you have open heart, passion, love my team, great. Should essentially 11 millionaires having a kick about ruin your entire week? Arguably no. And I find that fascinating as an analysis where these men will talk about and embrace masculinity as they should, without realizing that I feel we've pulled away from that energy, in that, competition is cool, man, but like, it's a business.
Yeah.
You're allowed to just enjoy life. And also you're not actually playing.
I think as well, like in football culture, there is, or I definitely find like with Leeds, it's like, I'm a bigger Leeds fan than you. And it's like a cool thing of like that. It's almost like that is too open, that you are you want to be the biggest Leeds fan in the world. But then there's also like the closeness in that as well, as like, you're not welcome in the gang because you're not as much of a big Leeds fan as I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I feel like, the root of it is in devotion, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Passion and devotion. And, we should make sure that we are able to translate that language and not just keep it, we shouldn't be in a space ever where like a kind of a badge, a concept, and loads of rich men are more important than, your family.
Yeah.
But fucking wicked that you love Leeds. And you're so right. Like, is there a better experience than going to see a football match and your team scoring? Like, wow. Just the joy, and you just feel so full.
Yeah. I think like as a like tool to being like, you could never have spoken to any of these people before around you, and you feel so connected with them.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, it was my favourite parts. I think that was one of my favourite parts. And I also really loved when you talk about taking medication for the first time, and like how that, because I think that's something that is so hard to describe.
Oh, mate.
The first time that I took it, I remember ringing my mum, and it was my mum's birthday actually. And I rang my mum and I was like crying. I was like, Mum, I can just hear one thought at a time.
Yeah,
like, is this what everyone else has thought the whole time? But then I think like it is a very weird thing. I think like you have spoken about like sort of like coming off. Have you come off medication completely now?
So I was off medication for years, and then I've recently, when I got super busy, I'm on like a really low.
I think that's what I'm finding with it at the moment, of like, it's too intense to be on all the time, but it's a tool to use when I need to be able to achieve things.
I honestly think that the dose I'm on is so low at the moment that it's bordering on placebo, but I like that.
Yeah.
I'll take that. It is a weird one because we're in an annoying position where you up the dose, and then I guess the executive functioning part of your brain starts operating, but it comes at the expense of like I feel like there's a gauze in between me and people in my life, and sometimes it just like legitimately fucks up with my blood circulation. Like my toes get really cold.
That's so strange.
I know, so I don't like that feeling, and I feel like I'm not like as aware as I should be. But I tell you one thing, and I want everybody with ADHD to know this because it's beautiful. It's that the issue and the crossover with the ADHD and the codependency will be that I can tell myself, and would have happened with the drugs initially, I won't be able to do this unless I've taken the drugs. That's the codependency. You won't be able to engage with this person. You can't go to that night unless you're drunk. You can't. That's the codependency. Yeah. I wrote 90% of that book completely sober. No alcohol, no medication, no nothing. And now, in terms of voices, I can't deny that.
Yeah, you know for a fact. I have done that.
No violent voice can tell me I can't do something like that, because it is possible.
Yeah.
What we're responsible for is just finding the conditions. And also, I was very easy on myself, with that. I had deadlines, which was good, encouraging, but I just had one thought in my brain, which was from Neil Gaiman, where he was just talking about just making even one sentence a day is a move forward. And I just made that promise to myself. And some days I'd write half a sentence, some days I'd write a whole page, 2 pages, Oh, well, you'll know this.
Something that I found really helpful, I included it in my book, the new book, is something that I learned about called elliptical time. So there's a woman called Marta Rose, and she talks about neuroemergent time, and it's like basically that like in industrial time, which is like thinking of time as linear in one straight line, is like a concept of capitalism, basically. Like, they told us like there's this many hours in a day and there's this many days in the week, and we move forward in a straight line. But actually a lot of neurodivergent people experience it slightly differently. So she gives like 2 examples, and one is spiral time. So that's like, instead of thinking, like, for example, if I started a degree at uni and I dropped out and I didn't finish it in the 3 years, under linear time, I failed because I've dropped out. Whereas under spiral time, it's like I'm here when I've dropped out, and then I'm going to go and do all these things, and I'm going to eventually come back in the spiral to this
Oh my
point,
God,
and that's going to be like
100%.
buried treasure that I can come back to.
Yes,
That's what
I
she
love
talks about.
spiral time.
And then the other one, which I love, is elliptical time. So that's like of like an ellipse,
Yeah.
and it's like saying that you have these, and this is what I really found when writing the book. You have these like tight bends, which is like when you're in that hyper focus mode of like, yeah, I can do this, and you're like bashing words out, and you're like really in it. And then you have like what I would think of as like the executive dysfunction, when you have like the periods where like you're not really getting any closer to, like, you can't sit down, you can't make yourself do it. But she calls that like spinning out in space. So it's like you have the ellipse, so you have the tight bend, and then you have the spinning out in space time, and then that's just part of the process to get back around to the tight bend. And I think I had to like really tell myself of like, no, it's not that I have executive dysfunction, it's just that I'm spinning out in space. Like, I'm collecting stardust, I'm like gathering all the thoughts in my brain, I'm like thinking about it, I'm processing it, but I'm just not moving forwards in a straight line. I think that was like really helpful for me to think about.
Love that.
And like experiencing time in a slightly different way. But yeah, I think that was one of the main things that helped me get through it. And then another thing that I have talked about quite a bit on the podcast so far is like the stereotypical mum advice is what I call it, but it's like that advice that feels really annoying at the time when you hear it, but it actually is the most helpful thing in the world, of like, get a good night's sleep, eat well, go for a walk, exercise.
You're listing all of the advice.
And it's like when you hear it, yeah, and nature. I think when you hear it, it's like, yeah, where it comes from is my mum's answer to anything is get a good night's sleep. Yeah. Like, I could be in whatever is going on, is like, get a good night's sleep. And at the time I'm like, Mum, it's not that I'm tired, like something really bad's happened, like the world's ending. But then you have the good night's sleep and like you actually do feel better. I know that's something that you've talked about a lot, of like, I think walking your dog and like having the reason to always get the fresh air. I guess two sort of questions is like, one, how do you think we get to a point where people are like able to take that advice on board? Because I think it's because it feels so tiny advice, people are often like, no, it's not just that I need fresh air, like it's bigger than that. And then like, two, how do you make yourself actually stick to doing those simple things even when it feels like you don't want to?
Well, our biggest barrier towards, harmony, I guess, at the moment is the understanding of incremental change, which is especially frustrating for people like us.
Yeah.
But I think the world is picking up on that. I think the world is headed into a space where ADHD might even be considered neurotypical in like 10 years, because everything's moving so rapidly and our attention is being pulled into different directions, and there's this constant reward online, update, like, all this kind of stuff. Look, a lot of the research that scientists have come out with have basically concluded, in terms of something like happiness, depression, is the biggest antidepressant is literally going for a walk 20 minutes a day. And because it doesn't instantly fix something, we are consumed by the idea that it doesn't work. But unfortunately, everything worth doing takes time.
Yeah. And
we are living in a world where there are quick fixes. And for some people, having a little helping hand, that's not a bad thing, But there will always, everything, I believe, will always still result in making those healthier choices, You could take sleeping pills or sleeping aids in order to get good enough sleep to then decide to sleep well. Yeah. As long as you decide to sleep well, you can, look, fundamentally, I had one person who was in such a low place. I can't even explain how they were really fucking sad. And me and my girlfriend just went, well, why don't you look after our dogs for a month while we were really busy?
Yeah.
I cannot explain to you the person that came back with the dogs. And it was just because they had a purpose every morning to get out of their house and walk these dogs. It wasn't down to them. And it changed. I really wish I could bottle up that effect and show people, you know what I mean? It was remarkable. And that's not to say everyone needs to have a dog. It's just that's immediately what a dog helps you do. Yeah. You have to go out and walk.
Yeah, I guess it's like an external factor that isn't just you waking up and being like, right, I'm going to motivate myself to go on a walk. It's like, I don't have a choice to go on a walk. I have a choice to do this thing that's going to make me feel better.
And also, it's like we're doing it for the feeling after.
Yeah. That's hard for us, I think.
Yeah, we're doing it for the feeling after. That's the dream. I heard someone else say that. I can't even claim that, but it stays in my mind. And it is funny how it shows up, because obviously it's going to be different between people. One thing I talk about with my friend who's also got ADHD, which we find hilarious, is we're actually really disciplined with food. It's one thing that we fundamentally understand, because we know that if we're to eat food that might not be super fun, tasty shit, we know that afterwards we're going to feel energized, vitalized, and especially for ADHD, we can think a lot clearer.
Yeah.
And yet with mess, you know, we don't really necessarily have the same thing, because we don't. Because if we're really being honest, like being slightly untidy funnily enough, doesn't actually kill anyone. But anyway, but for some reason we can't believe that people can't apply the same logic the other way.
Yeah.
Like, I'll get someone annoyed at me going, "Why wouldn't you do this?" Because you'll feel good when it's tidy.
Yeah, but you don't actually
And
feel
I'm being like,
yeah.
all right, well, why don't you eat some chicken and rice and stop stuffing your face with fried chicken, and you're gonna feel better.
Yeah.
Which is, listen, it's not easy, it's hard, but we just, once we can access that reward part of our brain. I'm so lucky that I've been guided into understanding nutrition, for example, because I know what it feels like. I already know. I've been there. So I know if I'm slumped. I know how hard it is to get into that running. And once you're up and running in health, it's so much easier. You don't start craving the same things. But we're so far from it. And it's so hard. Also, it's not anyone's fault.
Yeah.
We live in a world where our phones get all of our attention. Why wouldn't we scroll at night? Why wouldn't we eat the junk food? It's advertised to us every day of our lives. You know, we're really up against it. So I definitely don't want people to feel a sense of shame. But one thing, unfortunately or fortunately, that is absolutely irrevocably true, is that if you look after those parts of your life, sleep, nutrition, exercise, community, solitude, nature, a massive one.
Yeah.
Walking in the woods, game changer.
Yeah, I can remember when I was like at my worst, I dropped out of sixth form and I just like couldn't leave the house. And every day my mum would be like, come on, we're going for a walk. And I'd be like, no, I'm not going to go for a walk. You get outside, you literally like are down a farm track and you're like, oh, this is what it feels like to be a human being again.
Well, also it's like I say, the one thing that we always battle about in life, we're always battling about the opposites, you know, and some things people are, oh, there's no facts for that. There's no data. There's no statistics, you know, this morality, what's good, what's bad. One thing that's undeniable in existence is balance.
Yeah.
100%. And we can be aware of how to regain balance. So people who don't even necessarily have much to say in and around the specificities of neurodivergence, they'll still say to me from a spiritual context, they'll be like, well, if you're anxious, that's too much of, that's like, you have to restore balance by, if you're paralyzed of anxiety, you have to run.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're moving about too much, you have to take a moment. You know what I mean? Depression, if that's kept you in bed, get up.
Yeah.
You know, it's up. We just have to, and it will feel like the hardest thing in the world, 100%. But balance.
Yes.
That's what we have to try and find. And for the record, for anyone who feels uncomfortable with my thing about nutrition, this is one of my big existential spirals, by the way. Food, crazy, is that. Of course, you can be too healthy. Not too healthy. You can become obsessed by the concept of health. You can never be too healthy. But you can become obsessed by, this optimal existence. That too.
And then it's balanced with that as well.
Oh my God,
like,
you got to find balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, you can end up really isolating yourself, which is hard,
Balance always.
Balance always,
That's
man.
all we need.
That, honestly, if we feel too much of a thing, and we can figure out how to generate the opposing force, surely that's the way in which we can, like, that's what I say about every human being, masculine and feminine. If somebody's heart's closed, they're too isolated, they're too protective over themselves, I would argue you got to push some of that devotion and that openness, open your heart a bit, but don't go too far.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
A little bit, but not too much. Well, thank you so much for joining us for Book Club today. I have one last question for you.
Please. Thank you so much for reading the book, by the way. I'm buzzing about that.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I really loved it. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I really shy away from books that have anything to do with autism and ADHD because, like, it's my job. I talk about it all day, every day. I've written my own books about these things. And I'm like, I don't want to know about that when I'm reading. I want to switch off and but this was like, I loved it. I really did love it. And I love how you wrote how my brain sounds.
Yeah, it's like staccato.
Like, yeah.
Boom, 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 boom.
And I think it was so nice to read. But yeah, final question. What book would you recommend that we read next in book club? What's your fave book of the moment?
Oh, at the moment? Oh my God.
Or all time, but I feel like all time's a big old question.
Specifically about ADHD or no?
Anything.
Oh, it's just a book club?
Yeah.
Well, can it be poetry?
Yeah.
Well, my friend Caleb Femi has written a poetry book called The Wickedest about the London's longest running house party. And he's got an incredible way with words and just ability to articulate the human experience. So that's my big recommend. Caleb Femi, The Wickedest.
Thank you so much.
No,
and
no
thank
worries
you
at
for
all.
joining us.
Thank you.